Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Soul Creativity. Naven here. I'm so glad you're joining us, and the live chat is up. So if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to post them and we will get to them. I also want to mention if you're enjoying these shows, please like, subscribe, and share. It helps the channel. And I'm so excited today to have as my guest Adrienne Lee, the Wandering Art Historian. And I have spoken with Adrienne about so many different artistic topics. And each time it has just been a thrill. So, and I've learned so much. So, welcome, Adrienne, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. We have the best conversations. I will back you on that. We have fun. But thanks so much for the opportunity. I can't wait to chat.
Okay, I was just making a little adjustment because I did think I heard an echo on my with my voice, so hopefully that won't pick up. And you can still hear me,
Oh,
right, Adrian?
yes.
Okay, good. Uh, one of the things I really like your YouTube channel, by the way, which is posted under the video, as well as your blog. You know, everyone should check that out because it's just a wellspring of information and fun. But one of the things I really enjoyed was you taking a famous painting and telling us some of the things that were hidden in there. And the last one that I watched was The Last Supper,
Oh,
which I really enjoyed. And I think in the past I had heard some of that, but of course didn't remember. And so I had so much fun and found it so intriguing. So, before we get on to a more serious subject, I thought it might be fun if you just gave our viewers some tips about what they might see
oh,
in
sure.
this painting.
So I took some notes too, so I could remember. But yeah, the Last Supper is a painting that you. It's kind of ingrained in our subconscious mind. It gets parodied a lot in marketing and advertising, and we see it in pop culture references and stuff like that. And I think maybe even a lot of people have a print of that in their homes or what have you.
Hmm.
But what's so fascinating is it was kind of a revolutionary piece of. It definitely was a revolutionary piece of art for its time. We're talking Renaissance, 1400s, and Leonardo da Vinci, genius, goes without saying. But what was just so striking was that he created a space, a three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface with nearly life-size figures. And he emphasized that with painting forced perspective where the background recedes and it almost looks like you're looking into another space, and that was revolutionary for the time. If you look back at medieval art, it's all very flat, almost
Hmm.
cartoonish. But Da Vinci comes along and he's like, we're dealing with real humans, so let's depict them in a real space. And what's so cool about that is that in its own right is, a cool thing to keep in mind. But the way in which it's fascinated people with like what's hidden inside this, because what comes with Da Vinci being a genius is, ooh, he was putting secret things into his artwork and he was giving
Hmm.
us secret messages. And I'll be honest, it's more fun than real, like art history does have its urban legends as well. But there are some cool things in there. Like some people think there's a hidden warning regarding the apocalypse hidden in there. And I can't give you the details because I can't see that, but
Hmm.
it's interesting to think about. So yeah.
I I think when I was watching, there were things about the tablecloth
Oh yeah,
and then the arms reaching over where it wasn't the person's arm when you first look at it,
exactly.
and people in the painting. There were just so many things that I had overlooked, and I couldn't believe the detail in there that I was missing, as an observer, which
For sure. Because
You
it's
know?
something we've seen a million times. You're like, oh, I know what that is. They're all sitting at a table, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the far right of the painting, that tablecloth has a knot in it.
Mhm.
Why? I mean, you could speculate all day. If you look at the overall painting as a whole, the left side of the painting is in shadow while the right side is in daylight. And you're like, why did Da Vinci make that creative choice, you know? So I don't think we'll ever really know the extent, but I kind of like that. I don't really need to know. Like when it comes to an artist like that, I like that you can just kind of like speculate and have fun with it, you know?
It makes me think of poetry,
Oh,
because you can
yeah,
get lost into a good poem for years. Every time you read it, you see something
sure.
different. And if you think about it, for the most part, they're very short, so it just amazes me. And I think sometimes even the poet themselves, probably sees it differently as they work with it or they go back and read it. And a good painting is like that.
Absolutely.
Really good, any art form.
Something you can go back to, and even at a different point in your life and see something in a different way. Oh, that's some good art. Mm.
That's really powerful. Um, yeah, that's very interesting. So it's a good tip for all of us to keep in mind when we're looking at a great piece of art, to try to pick up on some of those details that we might tend to overlook.
Mhm.
One of the things that fascinated me in your recent blog posting, you wrote about the artist as alchemist,
Oh, yes.
and you were referencing the Book of Kells, which I've personally seen, and we were talking about that, but about spirituality, science, and magic. So those are like my three favorite things coming together. And to think that they come together in art or any of the art forms, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Oh, I would be happy to. Yeah, it's a lecture series that I'm working on right now. We just finished the third part, which was dedicated to the Book of Kells.
Mhm.
And usually when I'm crafting or producing a class, I do 4 weeks, and it's a different, like a theme, but a different topic every week. And it's kind of, you tune in. But with this, it felt different. You know, I had been studying a lot of different things personally that I was being drawn to: spirituality, science, and magic. And of course, it all comes together in art for me. And I realized I didn't want it to be like a class, where I wanted it to be, a different lecture every month so that you could have that space to kind of breathe, to ponder, to really let it sink in. And I'm really glad I did it that way, because you're right. Art is a form of alchemy. You are pulling different things from different cultures, sometimes from different parts of your own life, from the people around you. You're experimenting with different media, and it can be kind of magical, and yet a little scientific. So um, it really was speaking to me, and I was like, I can't be the only person who's been drawn to this stuff, especially after the last 20 months of dealing
Mhm.
with the outside world and its chaos. So I decided to do this lecture series. Other people seem to be digging it, so that's good. And yeah, I'm having a lot of fun. It's been very satisfying to my soul in a way, because I can talk to other people about it and they're like, oh, I didn't see it that way. Or they offer me a new perspective. So then I'm learning too,
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think with the pandemic and people really reevaluating your life, what you're doing with it, what's your work, what's your love, your passion, whatever. Um, Yeah, it felt really important to do this series right now, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that it is. And when you're talking about, um, pulling like from different cultures, making this magic, really transforming these things into something else when you're doing a piece of art, no matter what it is, we often pull from the same elements, I guess, is what I want to say. And so I know you and I have talked about, and you talk about in your lectures, the artist using archetypes and symbols and colors,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
think of textures, and you can take that to writing, to movie making, to um, actual some form of fine art, or physical art. So I was wondering, how you think about all of those elements, and if you have any others that you think, um, come into play.
For sure. And I love that you brought up writing and cinema because it's not just the visual arts, paint on canvas or marble sculptures. This goes to anything creative.
Hmm.
Think about your favorite books. The author creates a world that you can kind of get lost in. And how do they do that? By pulling all these different things together, those epic films where 2.5 hours have gone by and you're like you have to be snapped back to reality. Those directors and writers and cinematographers are pulling from all these different things. And I was thinking about it and I was like, well, what's the one thing that they all have in common? And it's like the one thing they all have in common is it's humanity. And I think that's what we're connecting with, even pulling from different cultures and time periods and this and that, is that one thread that ties it all together is that humanity that we're connecting with. Like just the idea that there are other people and other cultures and other places and other time periods that have felt what we felt.
Hmm.
And it's a really cool, it's almost like time travel. You know what I mean? So, um, yeah, I love the idea of archetypes. They pop up again and again in a different way throughout time, especially in art. We'll see something like, you can talk about the hero's journey. You can talk about, Joseph Campbell, all you want. But for me, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I don't care. Um, I like to think about a lot of directors have been commenting lately about, oh, these blockbuster superhero films and blah 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 blah. And it's like that's mythology told through the archetype of superheroes that we've written about in comic books.
Hmm.
So there's something very elemental that goes back to the shared humanity thing. So I love Marvel. I love those big superhero films because I see the connection to ancient Greek and ancient Roman mythology, to ancient Norse mythology, just
Hmm.
all these different cultural references. And I'm like, how can you not love that? I think it's cool. I just love it. So,
Well, I think too, the reason so many people are drawn to that, again, back to, thinking of an alchemist, the superhero really, and I think, we do have this inside of us, but we haven't been culturally trained to use it or to even recognize it. But we do have superpowers. Um,
absolutely.
and so I think that's why so many people are attracted to that. It ignites something inside of them that maybe, they don't outwardly know, but somewhere inside of us, we kind of know, we have these magical things taking place and we don't really tap into them and use them. So, I think that's a really cool observation, and why superpowers.
Who would
We all want
want
something.
superpowers? I mean, for who? I mean, if you go so far as to say Peter Parker is a nerdy, smart kid who works for his school newspaper and stuff, and then the most random, he gets bit by a spider. Who cares? And then his whole world changes, you know?
Mhm.
There's gotta be, I mean, the human connection is that I wouldn't mind being bitten by a radioactive spider if I could do that and be my friendly neighborhood spider person or whatever. So, yeah, I think there is an element of magic. Think about how many superheroes are geniuses and good with mechanics. And you've got your Tony Stark, who, went to MIT and could develop all of this. So, there's even that scientific element. So, yeah, I think it's, do I go so far as to say naive or limiting to write off those films? I think there's something really special about them. And I think there's a reason why we're connecting with them right now. It's like you said, that gives us the opportunity to connect with the spiritual and the magical that we want inside of us. So,
Right. And the superheroes, of course, they're always working for the greater good, which reminds me, if we activate our own superpowers, um, that gives us the opportunity. And I think if you're activating your real superpowers, that divine, sacred part of you, then you're automatically working, you're all automatically moving towards, being concerned for the greater good. And
100,000%. I love it. Yes.
so going in a little bit of a different direction,
Mm.
Adrienne, and based on another one of your blog posts, but it really attracted me when I read it because it was something that I'm very interested in, and it's graffiti art. And so reading your post and watching the little video that you included in it, made me wonder where graffiti art stands these days because, of course, I know of times it's been frowned upon or maybe not considered a real art form. But I've never agreed with that. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of fill us in on, what you've learned about
Sure.
that and what you think.
Oh, I'm happy to. I love graffiti art. I think there's that really cool element of it being the people's art. If you think about it, when graffiti art first started in the 70s and 80s, it was like, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention, or something like that. And paint started becoming available in aerosol cans. And we take that for granted, but for the young creative people of that time, you don't have to lug your paint supplies and your brushes and your cleaning solution out of door. You grab your spray paint can and you go out onto the streets. And I think the art world impact was substantial to the point where the lines became blurred. This was art that wasn't in the gallery. It wasn't, only for these people. This was the art made by the people, for the people, on the streets where everybody lived their actual everyday lives.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is I think there's still an element where it's kind of like, I don't know, is it crime? Is it vandalism? But I will say, I think we've progressed enough to the point where we're now seeing it as a public art form. We're finding that this can beautify our cities. We're designating space for these artists to work specifically in this medium and in these techniques that were once people were being arrested. It was a crime. And now we're at a point, and I love that you brought up the blog post because it was so weird to see this artist from the 70s and 80s, Lady Pink, on the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show teaching him how to spray paint on a wall. And I was like, what is this world that we're living in? And it's like, it's cool. Like, we're finally realizing when you give people a space to make art, they make art and it changes the space. It, like you said, it's a form of magic. They are pulling magic, making something beautiful out of nothing. That's alchemy right there, you know?
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's an art form that I love. I appreciate. I love public outdoor murals. I'm so glad we're at a point where it's being appreciated, and maybe people will learn more about its origins because Lady Pink was on Jimmy Fallon, you know?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, that was a very interesting episode that I wouldn't have seen without watching your blog. I think, some of my early, other than what I would just see in my own, world, um, for graffiti, but some of the more intense, maybe, if that's the right word, was what I was seeing, in Northern Ireland. And it
absolutely.
makes me think of how graffiti can be so political and how it can speak to people that don't otherwise have a voice. And how important that must be if, like you were saying, not everybody can go to a gallery or a museum. And so they may be kept away from art, and maybe they wouldn't even necessarily relate to all the art, or maybe they wouldn't feel it was speaking to them, but they could walk down their street and see something that really represents or messages, what they've been feeling. And so I like any art for that, reason, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. But I think graffiti is much more immediate, and that's why it's so important, and how it can be. It's really a good form of self-expression, not just for yourself, but your whole community.
Absolutely. I mean, the impact is almost instantaneous if you think about it,
Hmm.
because most, as it was in the olden times back in the 70s and 80s, people were working at night. They had to work quickly. They had to get in, they had to get out. And you get a certain window because the daylight comes, someone notices it. If they alert the authorities, you have to get the right people to come out, clean it up, paint over it. So you've got this really powerful window,
Hmm.
where your voice is out there, whether you've tagged it or not. It could be completely anonymous, but like you said, people see that
Hmm.
and it's empowering. And I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting art form, and I think like a really kind of powerful and empowering form of self-expression.
For sure. For sure.
Um, and then another direction, and this is something that you and I were talking about, and I think it's really interesting in the artistic realm, the muse. And we were talking about unlikely muses because I was telling you about my experience with Jim Morrison, and I've been blogging a little bit about that. And so you were talking about an artist coming to you that it just so happened it was someone that I watched a documentary on and fell in love with her. And you were saying you were really kind of taken by surprise that she, showed up as your muse, and you felt, um, empowered and influenced by her. So I'm wondering if you can introduce her and tell us
Sure.
a little
Oh,
bit.
I'm happy to. First of all, I have to say I was totally intrigued by your connection with Jim Morrison as of late, and it makes sense because words and poetry, like, that makes sense that you
Hmm.
you connect with that. And I read about the book that his sister put out, and I watched the video about his motel room covered in words.
Right.
Mind blowing. So it's cool that we both kind of had like a surprise surprise special guest in our lives. And I really connected with this artist. Her name is Huma af Klint. She's Swedish, or she has passed away. She lived in the late 1800s and she passed away in the 1940s. And an amazing woman who never married, never had kids, but was kind of like on the outside, like, you know that phrase, well-behaved women seldom make history.
Yeah.
Okay, that resonates always. But on the outside, she seemed like a perfectly well-behaved woman. You know, you see pictures of her very Victorian, and she was incredibly talented. And even for her time, she was accepting jobs as an artist. She was, and not just like, you know, what some people would say, pretty drawings or pretty paintings by women at the time. She was doing medical illustration work for like surgery books and stuff like that. And when she passed away, she left her nephew like 1,200 works of art in an almost pure abstract form. And it was shocking. It was like, he's like, what do I do with all this? And the cool connection to the words, she left him all of these notebooks that explained everything. Oh my gosh, it's mind blowing. So she really spoke to me this year. The idea of working in secret, there's like a little magic to that, you know. Plus, she was a medium. She was receiving messages from a higher power. Bear with me, everyone. Like, she was getting messages and creating artwork via those messages from another realm, another dimension. And it's like, I looked through her life and I was like, there were all these different opportunities where male artists started experimenting with abstraction, like, you know, your key players, Kandinsky, Malevich, Mondrian, all these guys are dabbling in abstract or non-objective art. And there were opportunities for her to be like, hey, so look what I'm doing. Or I've been doing that for like 6 years. You're actually late to the party, you know, that kind of thing. And she never really did. And that stuck with me in a way. And I was like, well, why not? Why didn't she connect with these guys or whatever? And like, it hit me. I was like, it's because she wasn't making the art for them. She wasn't creating this artwork for the art world. She wasn't trying to change the direction of art. She was doing something for herself. And to the point where I kind of think she was making the art for us, like right now, 21st century. She's like, this isn't for Kandinsky. This isn't for the people of my time. This is for the people of the future. And that's magic. Like, wow, that gets me every time.
Yeah, I watched that documentary about her and it was beautiful and it was so moving. And I feel a lot of what you just said applies to Jim Morrison too. The amount of work he left behind is mind blowing, and also I feel like it almost speaks more to us now. You know, I think of them as kind of like quantum artists. You know, we're just catching up with them.
Trademark that, because that's real. That's real. I love it.
Yeah, she is just wonderful. We are almost at the end, but I do wonder if you can, I know we could talk forever. I love this topic. These topics, I should say. I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about how to read a movie. Because I love, you know, movies as an art form as well. And of course, you know, I love writing, and I like your little series on, you know, how to read a movie.
I think, first of all, I'm with you. I love movies. I love film. I love watching something so many times where you get something new every time, you know, like those are just gems of art. And I wanted to do this series because I was applying the same technique to how to read a painting. Like, it transfers over to film and cinema. So when you're looking at a painting, sometimes you just need the clues. You can walk into a museum and be like, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. It looks cool. Still not 100% sure. That's when you kind of take on the role of art history detective. And you start looking at how does the artist use color? What about symbols? Things of that nature. And you're looking for these clues and repeated stories. Obviously, that goes back to our mythology and superheroes. That's a repeated story. We love that. Humans love stories. So I moved all that over to cinema, and I was like, you can use the same clues to analyze a film and see something in a different way, like by looking, how does the director use the color red? When you watch a movie looking for that, it opens your eyes to something that maybe you didn't recognize before. And the repeated stories. There are so many films that are out there. Like, people are like, oh, there's no new stories in Hollywood. There have never been new stories. We're telling the same stories from the Baroque period, from the Renaissance period, just in a different way. Maybe instead of Renaissance Italy, it's in space. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I love that. I love the use of symbolism in an incredible film, like when you get that cool thread that ties it all together. So yeah, it's just kind of a challenge to have people maybe reevaluate your favorite films and say, so why is it your favorite film? Is it because you're drawn to how the director uses colors and symbols and tells the story? And more often than not, it's like, oh shoot, I didn't realize that's what I was picking up on the whole
Mhm.
time. So yeah, it's a fun series. It takes a lot of work, but it's fun work,
Yeah,
watching those movies and taking notes and
that's really interesting. And as you know, I just recently finished my first documentary, and I was watching a bunch of videos, as I was making it, because basically I had to teach myself everything. And I was watching this one video. I was looking up, I think, color correction or something. And it was something I hadn't really thought too much about. And the person that was doing the video was talking about color, and he took the same film, and it was a superhero film, and I can't think of which one it was now, but two different directors did it. And he showed you one was done in a lot of like yellows and reds, and it was bright, and you saw every detail. And then the other one was very dark and rather muted. And it was the same story, but it really created a different feel to the whole movie, and it kind of lent itself to you. I think even like feeling like the way things were going to turn out and what
oh
was going to
yeah.
happen, that really played into all that. So that's really interesting. And it, definitely our talk should lead us all to be to be more observant when we're, whether it's art or reading or watching a movie, because we're probably not picking up on half of what's there.
I know, you're right, so true.
Well, I do want to thank you so much, Adrienne, and I hope you'll come. I mean, Adrienne, I hope you'll come back, because I feel like we could talk. You have so much information, and we could still go in a lot of different directions. And so
Oh,
maybe you'll come back and give us some more information. And I want to mention before we end, for everyone, next Thursday, we're going to turn the tables a little bit, and I'm going to be interviewed by a very good writer and poet and journalist, Laura Lori Lind, and she's going to be asking me about making the documentary. And so that will be Thursday night. The documentary premieres on Friday. So I'm excited to do that. And it'll be a little twist for the show for a change. So, with that said, I want to thank you again, Adrienne, and please come back. And I want to welcome anyone new listening and thank everyone who sticks with me through these shows. Really appreciate it. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Adrienne.
my pleasure. Thank you.